Alright, what's up everybody? I am going to start reading Tehanu, I think I'm saying that correctly, by Ursula K. I have never read any of the later books in the Earthsea cycle. I have only read the first three in the original trilogy. So this book was written in 1990, almost somewhere around like 20 years after The Farthest Shore, which completed the original Earthsea trilogy. And I've always wanted to read some of the later ones, but I've never got around to it. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through a discussion. A heads up, there are going to be spoilers in this, a whole lot. Pretty much going to spoil the entire book. So if you haven't read it, then this probably isn't for you. And I'll probably go through 2 to 4 chapters on each video. This book isn't that long, so I feel like 2 to 4 chapters should be sufficient to quickly get through this book. So the story starts off with Goa. Her real name is Tanar though. And so if you've read The Tombs of Atuan, you'll know that Tanar was the main character in that story. So right at the beginning of chapter 1, they find a child who has been beaten, burned, and then abandoned. And so they're tending to this child, trying to keep her alive. And we get an interesting line at the end of chapter 1. So that's going to be page 6 in my book, my version. And this is talking about Tanar. She spoke in her own language, and that language is Kargish. I served them and I left them, she said, and I will not let them have you. So I don't know exactly what this means, but in the Tombs of Atuan, the Kargish people in the Kargish lands did not value women very highly. One of the main themes of the Tombs of Atuan is kind of this repression of women. And it's also possible that this child was going to be a sacrifice of some kind to the Nameless One. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. Not sure if that's right. So a year or so passes, and Tanar has been raising this child that was beaten and burned. And her name is Tehanu. And they get a summons from Guin, so they leave their village and they're on their way to Guin's cottage. So as they're walking on their way to Guin's, Goha, or Tanar, tells Tehanu this story about a song that Guin had heard. And he had never heard it before, so he started to inquire about the provenance or the origin of this song, which is interesting because I guess Guin has just heard every song in the world, but it discusses a certain history where dragons and humans used to be a single being, and then at some point later these lineages diverged, and Guin is seeking out the origin of the story, and in doing so he meets a lady, and when he first meets her he perceives her as a dragon, and he asks a question of her, so are you a dragon or are you a person? So he thinks either the dragon or the human part must be the true being, the true core of the identity of this person. And so he asks about that, and she says something interesting on page 16, at least of my version. If only it were that simple. I think what she means here is that this duality is the way that she is. One is not more important than the other. And this idea of duality is prevalent in all of Earthsea. And oftentimes it has to do with striking a balance and a harmony between polar opposites. They continue walking, and on the road they encounter thieves. And we get some interesting lines about what's happening in the world, right? So this world now is rife with lawlessness. Magic charms are becoming defective. And you have people who don't practice magic who are promising immortality. Another reference to another book, if you've ever read The Farthest Shore. And one other thing, my best guess is that, if you have the beginning of The Farthest Shore and then here's the end of The Farthest Shore, I think this book, Tehanu, is kind of starting right before The Farthest Shore ends. I think. They get to Guin's and everyone goes to sleep, and except Tanar. And there's this interesting little line about Tanar being awake, and she says her name, and the flame and the fire kind of dances. And that really sums up her identity, that she is this small flame in the dark. And it is a small flame, but it's also incredibly powerful because of the dark and the shadows that it always invariably is able to stave off. And then right on the next page, page 25, we learned that Theru means like burning and the flaming of flames. So for me, this kind of has dragon connotations. So I'm gonna guess here that Theru is probably one of these half dragon, half human beings. So Ogian says something to Tanar about teaching Theru, but he makes this reference to Nadet Rogue. They fear her. And I'm not sure what that means, but already in this story, by the end of chapter 3, I'm getting a sense that it's about the place that women occupy in this society. And so if you remember from the other books, women don't go to Rogue to become mages. They're just not permitted. So my best guess is that he wants Theru to learn how to become an actual mage, a person of real power. And so right before Ogian passes away, he tells Tanar his real name. And so after Ogian passes away, this character, Auntie Moss, who I think is kind of a witch, is preparing some charms, and she has some charms in a little pouch, and she puts the pouch in Ogian's left hand. And then two wizards arrive, one from Rialbi and one that is just referred to as like from Gauntport. And they know that a great mage has passed, so they're there to pay their respects. One of the mages, the mage from Rialbi, shows up, and without saying anything, you can just tell that he's condescending and prideful. And he just imperiously flicks the charm pouch from Ogian's left hand with his staff. Doesn't say anything, doesn't ask anybody anything. He just flicks it out like it's not supposed to be there. The audacity. After this happens, the mage from Rialbi and the mage from Gauntport are both kind of commiserating together, and they're just completely dismissive of the two women right there. They just act like they're not even there. And Tanar says Ogian's real name, Ihal. So after she speaks his name, the young mage from Rialbi looks at her, but he's so patronizing and so supercilious that he just observes a middle-aged woman's presence and then looks away. The other mage from Gauntport is just baffled as well by her presence and basically asks, like, who are you? They're just confused that she could have had anything important to offer them at all. What Tanar says after this is actually very challenging. But she says, who I am is your business to know, I think, but it's not mine to say. And what she means by that, I think, is that mages, as they learn, their skill, they are able to understand the context of a person, how it fits into the balance, unravel the unknown about it, and they can determine and decipher your true name without you telling them. But it's also something that you never tell anyone. So I think the challenge, the rebuke that Tanar has made here is basically, you looked at me, you saw only what your pride told you, just this useless middle-aged woman, and you should have been able to discern who I was, but you weren't, and you let that knowledge pass. And she's basically like, it's not my job to tell you these things. You're men of power, you should know these things. And it felt like a way to take their skill, the way they discern names, and apply it to this situation, the way they just looked at this situation, the context of this situation, and they overlooked the true meaning and value of who she was in this moment. And this pisses the young mage off. Take care, woman, how you speak to men of power. And then she sort of apologizes, and there's another interesting line right after that. They stood over him, alive and full of power, offering no friendship, only contempt, rivalry, and anger. She's talking about contempt, rivalry, and anger for her, for Ogien's own friends. And then she is startled and surprised to realize, once they realize who she is, that she said the name, and because they were so dismissive of her, because they were so prideful, which is also a theme in The Farthest Shore, because they were so prideful and dismissive, they overlooked the truth right in front of them, and they did not hear Ogien's true name. And then she has another rebuke for him right at the end of chapter 3, where she says, "Is listening not power?" They chose not to listen to her. And then at the very end of this scene, which I thought was a really good scene, she grabs the pouch with the charms and restores its place to Ogien's left hand. And I thought that was really cool. Hopefully you enjoyed watching this, and I will see you next time. Peace.